My 5-gram trip with psilocybe cubensis from last summer. After experimenting with psychedelics over the past few years, experiencing their potential, and learning about them in general, I felt compelled to take on the infamous 5-gram trip alone in silent darkness. My very first psychedelic mushroom experience was a few years ago, and while that experience sparked my interest in this substance, I hadn't had access to it again until recently. The idea of having a full-fledged experience with the mushroom had been on my mind for a while, and now, during my vacation, I had the opportunity to go out to the countryside and go through with it. Earlier that day, I spent time in nature, jogging, swimming, and listening to Terence McKenna's experiences to clear my head and prepare myself as much as possible for what was to come. My last meal was about 4 hours before I chewed down the mushrooms, which I did around 10 p.m. The taste wasn't horrible, but far from pleasant. After eating all 5 grams, I turned off the lights and lay down in bed. After about 20 minutes of meditation, I needed to pee, and when I turned on the light, everything looked much sharper than before. I could already feel that something was starting to happen. Returning to meditation became more of a challenge, and irrational chaos thoughts about how this could go wrong began creeping in. I did everything I could to dismiss these thoughts, and as the trip deepened, my thoughts shifted towards myself, my life choices, whether I was a good person, and so on. Questions like these surfaced in my mind, and I felt completely cornered. As I wrestled with my inner self and questioned myself, I noticed how another part of me was answering these questions. It was as if 2 versions of me were having a conversation in my head, one side asking questions and the other providing answers. When I became aware of this bizarre thought process, I realized I was completely gone. Something other than myself agreed on. At this point, beyond closed eyelids, I saw black shadows constantly moving, like black trees waving against a dark background. The hallucinations intensified, and color particles started appearing in my vision. A little later, I turned on the light to get some water and was hit by the strongest hallucinations I've ever had. Everything looked like it was drawn, like an old Disney film, but hyper-realistic. I stumbled into the kitchen, got my water, and made my way back to bed, realizing that the trip was now fully in motion. At that moment, I felt a sense of joy and gratitude for being able to have this experience, and it was as if the mushrooms responded to this joy by telling me that I was allowing them to reach their full potential by consuming them, that this was their purpose. Having my gratitude mirrored in this way made me feel almost euphoric, and the whole thing felt like a mental lovemaking between me and the mushroom. I felt incredibly hopeful. Lying there in darkness, I was shown wild visions of both possible and impossible scenarios. Saying that I was shown visions is actually an understatement. I experienced whatever I thought of. I remember hearing a dog bark, neighbors laughing, and feeling as if I was right there with them. I genuinely cared about them, and in that moment, nothing else existed. I also remember being an animal, riding a roller coaster in space, living a life where I had reached my full potential as a human, and feeling the immense sorrow and regret I would have if I didn't show my gratitude to my loved ones, among many other things. As these visions unfolded, I eventually forgot who I was. My loved ones became irrelevant, and what followed me was the most powerful wave of love I have ever felt. But there was no me to experience the love. It was more like I was love. A love as deep as a mother's for her child, or what one might imagine feeling in heaven, multiplied by 1,000,000,000. It was a bottomless, pure love in its most fundamental form, crushing my soul. This love came in waves, and in between, the visions continued, exploring concepts like the universe, relations, and history, the human experience, femininity, and masculinity, and how they complement each other. The dynamics of the universe revealed themselves, how everything is connected. It was so laughably simple, yet impossible to articulate with words, something that can only be experienced. At times, there was a presence, an entity, mushroom spirit, that made itself known, seemingly orchestrating the visions I was experiencing. In hindsight, it feels like this entity's goal was to show me the weirdest, most ineffable things possible. Sometimes the visions were so bizarre and intense that I had to ask for a break. The entity listened, stepped back, and calmed down. After tripping for a while, I was overwhelmed with gratitude on a level that made me cry. The realization that there are limitless ways to experience the universe and that I get to be human completely overwhelmed me. It became clear that my everyday experience of life is not something to take for granted. I also saw beings, gnomes, goblins, and fairies around the room. They were in the corner of my eye, but disappeared when I looked directly at them. Even after the peak, I was still tripping hard, but could do nothing but laugh at how absurd yet undeniably real this experience was. On the way down, I even felt like I was experiencing dementia and schizophrenia. My consciousness was the only thing that remained in a body I had forgotten. But there was no discomfort. There was no one to feel my discomfort. My mind was completely fragmented. When I finally recognized myself again, and the pieces of sober life fell back into place, I lit a joint, ate some fruit, and fell asleep with McKenna in my headphones. Absolutely no come down the next day. Quite the opposite. I considered this trip a success. I've received an overwhelming amount of information to process, more than I could ever put into words. However, I would never do this for fun or as someone inexperienced. I do recommend 5 grams in silent darkness, but it's crucial to understand that you are placing yourself in the hands of the mushroom. My impression is that the mushroom wants what's best for you, but respect, humility, both towards yourself and others, and previous experience with strong psychedelic trips are determining factors in how it will unfold. If you guys enjoyed today's trip, make sure to like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next trip.